Yes, it is. It is showtime. Welcome, everybody, to Comic Book Radio. I'm your host, Peter Cimetti, and tonight my guest is Joshua DERSTINE, and he's on Comic Book Radio episode 40. Episode 40. Before I bring him on board tonight, I want to say hello to those of you in the chat. We got Buddha Bear here. Manny Cornejo. What's up, Manny? We got Andrew as well. What's up, AL? Bored Irene, what's up? Hope you're doing well. We got DJ D here. Alright, so for now, that seems to be all. But there will be more. Let's bring on the man of the hour. That, of course, would be Mr. Joshua DERSTINE.
Hey, how's it going?
What's up, Josh? Is it okay if I call you Josh, or do you prefer Joshua?
Totally.
Josh bother. Is cool? Alright. All right, so I want to talk to you about a bunch of things tonight. I appreciate you reaching out to be on the show. You got a campaign and all that. We're going to get to that. But I want to talk to you tonight about a couple of things. Now, is it correct? You're 18 years old?
Yes, sir.
Man, oh man. All right, so we got a youngin' here. We got a new kid on the block. Now, I'm not going to tease you about that because you are incredibly talented, young man. Do you know that?
Thank you.
All right. So, if you haven't seen his work, I'm going to do a quick flash here of the Indiegogo campaign. He's got this book, Amarok. Right now, it's at $15,095. And I'm gonna tell you something here, Josh. And I'm gonna tell you something. I'm gonna let you in on something here. Okay. When I saw your art on Twitter, I thought you were full of it.
You did.
I thought that there was no way that was your art. I thought you were either using AI, or you were swiping, or you were tracing,
no.
or you were stealing and putting your signature on it.
Not me.
It's really good. It's really good, especially for 18 years old. Now, the first time I saw your art was sometime last year. And I got to tell you, you got some great stuff. But I was really hesitant to comment or share any of it, even though a lot of people were. I was like, this is too good. This is too 17. This is someone out there. This is some like 40, 50, 60-year-old, or this is some kid who's punking us all.
Right.
And being like, hey, look at me, you know, I made this. Hey, what do you think? You know, oh yeah, look at this professional level art that I'm putting out here. You know, I'm 17. I made this stuff. What do you think? Josh, how long have you been drawing for?
Well, I think most artists have been like, everybody kind of draws as a kid, but I really started taking it seriously when I was like 14, but I had drawn off and on for fun before then, and then I didn't even really start taking comic books seriously until I was 15, so.
Wow. I do want to tell you, tonight you've got there's a little bit of a, when you talk, a little bit of static interference coming through. Can you adjust maybe the earbud thing, maybe unplug it and then plug it back?
Yeah, for sure. Is that better?
Let me see. Do you guys hear that, or is it just me? I'm hearing, when you talk, there's kind of like a crackly noise, like a bit of a static. Oh. Can you say something now?
Is it working?
Oh, well, it picked you up differently. Now it sounds like you're, let me see here. I'll try to do this.
Oh, that's not good.
Oh, wait, no. I think you're sounding better, honestly.
Okay.
It's sounding now like the microphone is picking you up. And maybe before it wasn't?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's true.
All right. Okay. Great. Good. Yeah, I'm not hearing the static now.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Wonderful. Yeah, Past Master was saying a little bit of static. Okay, great. All right. So you've been drawing for a long while. When did you start getting into actually comic book creation?
So the main thing that really brought me into comics was actually when COVID hit. So around that time period, I decided I wanted to take this seriously, do it as a job. Thankfully, that's right when David Finch started streaming on his YouTube channel. So I would tune into that every Monday night and learn as the weeks went on.
Wow, so you were following along with him? Is that Is that what you're saying? You were kind of drawing what he was drawing and taking tips and whatnot?
Yeah, I would take his tips and do the tutorials and follow his roadmap and picked up Bridgman and Loomis and Hampton and all those books and how to draw comics the Marvel way. You know, all the normal drawing books.
Oh wow. Well, it's good that you're sticking with the classics. It
Oh yeah,
shows. You
for
got
sure.
some, and
Thank you.
I want to talk to you about dynamics in your art as well tonight too. But we'll get to
Hmm.
that in just a second. Um, Past Master says you remind him of a young Dale Keown. Have you heard that before?
Oh yeah, I keep hearing that a lot, and that's such a huge compliment because Dale Keown is like he's definitely one of my all-time favorite artists, and he's just a phenomenal artist, and he's a great guy. So
Yeah, yeah, fantastic, man. That's great. All right, so drawing something is different than putting a comic together, as you're well aware.
hmm
Uh, your storytelling style, compositionally, how do you go about that?
well, it's definitely all been a learning process. I've kind of dove headfirst into it, but my thing is I'm really big into image. So a lot of the image stuff really inspires me in terms of how they set things up. Todd McFarlane, especially. Todd's probably my biggest inspiration when it comes to storytelling. Now, obviously, I'm still like learning on the go, so I still got a long ways to go. But Todd McFarlane, Stephen Platt, especially how they set up things compositionally. I mean, even Del Keown as well, Jim Lee, those guys. But I really like the idea of having. You can see it in the first three pages. Is you have two sort of lead up pages that are a bit it's more about setting stuff up, building the suspension, having more panels, letting the reader breathe a little bit. And then when page three comes up, that's like the splash page. That's supposed to be the money shot, right? So you really want to um, throw people off their feet. So that's sort of the idea is that the first two pages, especially, are sort of focused on setting up the environment, setting up the characters, having a little bit of dialogue, having a little bit of build up, and then the third splash page really shows you Amarok in his full glory. Just a very grounded standing pose, but you know it still kind of has that intimidation factor. And then as the issues go on, we have some action scenes that get more and more intense, and I'm trying out different layouts and different Brett Booth style layouts as well. And and then as we go on, the splash pages are going to be more and more, even more dynamic. So
Wow. Now you mentioned a bunch of really talented artists there as some of your influences.
mhm.
Is there any particular reason as to why they're your influences and not more modern contemporary
Oh, for
artists?
sure. In my opinion, I think the main focus on comics that sets it apart from any other medium is it's the marriage of all aspects of storytelling. So you can have multiple things going on with dialogue and internal monologue, and it's all going on at once, right? So on top of all that, you want to make it as cool as you can because it's the only place that you can really exaggerate life and make it bigger than life and cartoon because that's sort of where the roots come from is cartooning. So if I wanted to look at a picture book, I could pick any of those up and just look at a scene by scene picture book, so I don't feel the need to have hyper realistic drawings because to me that's kind of boring and it kind of takes away a lot of that storytelling power that you have when you can have huge figures and super dynamic poses that aren't actually even possible and just crazy compositional stuff that really only works in comics. So those guys, to me, they embody everything that cool comic books are. They're all about bringing energy and life to their art. I mean, even Joe Madureira, um, you know, those guys are all about prioritizing the energy rather than prioritizing the technical aspects. And to me, that really speaks to me because it allows the story to be much more expressive and to have much more of an impact on the viewer rather than it just being like a movie. I think comics really mess up when they make an attempt to be like in a movie because it's you're just trying to copy another medium that was not meant to be implemented into a sequential story art telling structure.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Actually, I was just on. Do you know who Narwhal is?
No, I do not. Sorry.
Okay. Narwhal's a terrific dude, very creative, great writer, artist. I was just on Narwhal's channel talking to him about that, about comics that are trying too much to become movie and TV adaptations. And it's really cutting off the legs of creativity with the comic. So it's wonderful to hear you echo that sentiment, because it's becoming truer now more than ever before. You know, I really think when we make comics that you should strive to tell such a visually interesting story that it rattles the mind of a Hollywood producer. How can we possibly make that?
Exactly.
You know? Yeah, because that's going to entertain the reader. You're giving them something that they probably have never seen before. Whether it's the character design or the dynamics and the composition of the page, you're doing something interesting that would be difficult, if not maybe even impossible, to replicate in real life on the screen, whatever it may be. I think that's when you know you're creating something fun. So you're really honing in here on like the visceral imagery and the energy of comic book art. That seems to be what really draws you to comics. Outside of the art aspect, are you writing the story as well?
Yeah, I am writing the story as well. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there's that static again. What's going on with the static?
Sorry, I don't know.
That's so weird. As far as writing goes, who are some of your influences as writers? Or at least what influences your writing?
Yeah, so definitely in the comic book field, Frank Miller is probably a big one. My favorite thing about comics is that it is the primary storytelling place where you can implement that internal monologue of the character, and it really just works better than any other storytelling medium, because you can have the character's thoughts while they're doing actions, while they're going throughout things that could be unrelated to their thoughts even. For example, in books, you have to either focus on the actions or the thoughts, or try to go back and forth, but comics is pretty seamless in the fact that you can do it at the exact same time. And even with movies, it's very hard to sort of have that internal monologue without it being a bit cheesy or coming off wrong. And so for me, the appeal of comics has always been this Frank Miller-esque storytelling, where you really get into the heart of the character and the soul of the character, and you're seeing what they're thinking as they're going along. And it doesn't necessarily have to relate to their actions, because that's where the sequential storytelling comes in with the pictures. And so you can have them thinking one thing while they're doing another. And to me, that's such a massive appeal for comics, especially.
You sure you didn't listen to the interview I just did?
No, I haven't. I'm just really passionate about comics.
I said all of that. It was just 20 minutes ago. Yeah. You're wise beyond your years, young Joshua. Now, unfortunately, we are getting that static again. Do you think you can? It seemed to work when you unplugged it and then plugged it back in. Let's see if we could do that. And after the show is done, too. Okay, it looks like the static noise is gone. Better? Oh, it's coming back. After the show is done, I'm gonna stay for a couple minutes. I'm going to give you a microphone recommendation that won't break the bank, and then this way you can get that, because it's so important, because you got some good stuff to say, and it's important that people can hear it. All right. Yeah, a writer as well. Yeah. AL asks, is this a standalone story or a mini series, or will it be ongoing?
So the idea of this is that something that I really like about manga is how it is sort of like the author's magnum opus a lot of the times, because it's a very long ongoing series that has a long story to tell, that's very centered around the character, and their interests aren't derived to moving on to the next project. For example, they really like to take their time and go from issue 1 to whatever until it's finished. And that's the same idea behind Spawn. And so that's something that really appeals to me. And the fact that this can be ongoing, if I get enough support, we can continually pump these out. And there's not really a clandestine goal for it to finish. It's sort of like Berserk. So as long as I don't die, it's going to keep going for a pretty long while, hopefully.
All right, man. Oh, man. How long ago did you come up with this character and this story?
So I think we all kind of come up with our original characters or worlds when we're kids, and then we either just move on or forget them. But if you notice, there's obviously a few people that kind of stick with that, like Todd McFarlane or Eric Larson, those guys.
Yeah, you always
Um,
come back to that.
yeah, you always come back. So
Yeah,
Amrock is something that I made when I was middle school, which wasn't that long ago, but for me it was. And so he started out very, very different. And so each year I would kind of revamp him, and the story and the world would progress with him as he progressed, and also as I matured and learned things as a person and grew up a little bit more. And so it's just been a continual sort of rebirth of the same idea with coming back stronger and better than before every single time. And this is the year that I feel like it's at its most solid that it's ever been and the most ready to be displayed to the public. So it's just been an ongoing, reoccurring sort of idea that I've had in my head for a while.
oh, very nice. Yeah, well, it sounds like you've been coming up with stories for this character for a while. I know you said it's not too long ago, but it is true that even if it's not a character that you created a long time ago or whatever, the subject matter, you at least you come back to that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's something that means something to you and always has, and it feels right. You know, it feels like it's you. It's you
Yeah, yeah,
in a comic, you know, and that's so important when you're
exactly.
making your own story. Because the more you get further away from that, the more you're trying to figure out the potential audience and this and that and the other thing. You know that you've
Oh
got
yeah,
time to
for
figure
sure.
that out.
Yeah.
But when you're putting that first work out, especially, you know, if you the more you stray from
Mm-hmm.
the thing you care about, the harder it's going to be in terms of telling a story that not only means something to you, but is actually going to mean something to the reader.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that's great to hear. And there's the link. Past Master Dan's got it up there, right there in the chat. It's also in the description of the show in case you guys want to go check it out. We will touch upon that more in the second half of the show. We got about 10
Thank
minutes
you.
before we take a quick break. So, Josh, going back to not just your art and your writing. What's your creative process like in terms of coming up with character creation and in terms of how you went into it to design this character and maybe other characters as well within the story?
Yeah, so it's definitely a very long and sort of complicated process. I think it usually starts off when you sort of have that euphoric moment where you have stumbled upon this idea that you think is really special and unique, and then you sort of take that and try to cultivate and build things around that. And that's definitely what happened with Amarok. And so, as far as his character design, he's been redesigned over and over and over. Um, to the point where he's at now. And what I really focused on with this design was creating something that's very iconic yet simple and is very easy to redraw in 5 seconds, for example, by anybody. You can just kind of add the horns and the cape and the arm and all that stuff. And the other thing that really appealed to me is that he's a very he's an artist's character, so he has a lot of stuff that I, at least as an artist, really love drawing. He has that um, very insane anatomy. He has the wrapping around his arms and his calves, which is a very nice texture to play with. He has his sort of like ninja pants, and it has some really nice flowy fabric, and then the ripped up cape. And then the arm is quite a fun idea because it's essentially very similar to like splayed anatomy, but it's obviously like a metallic metal arm. And then obviously he has that fun helmet design that can really be interpreted a bunch of different ways. I sort of looked at that as similar to like Batman's ears because everybody's always drawing those differently. So it's sort of however the artist wants to interpret it is how it gets drawn. So as far as the design goes, it was just about making it really fun and cool and iconic, but also easy to remember and not too oversaturated or overcomplicated with detail.
Yeah, speaking of which, my next question is going to have to be looking at the art. You know, there is a lot of detail here.
Mm-hmm.
What's the average timetable to get a page done?
Oh, that's a good question. My thing is that I'm really like a perfectionist with it, so I really spend a lot of time trying to noodle around and figure out exactly how I want things to look. And so, if I kind of kept track, that would kind of like kill myself because I'd be like, oh man, this one's taking longer or this one's taking shorter, or, so I haven't really, you know, kept track whenever I do my art. So,
Yeah, the it does remind me a little bit of a Minotaur as well.
yeah, for sure. And that's the other interesting thing that I've been getting is that so many people, it's reminding them of so many different things that I haven't even thought about when I was designing it. They're like, oh, it looks like this, or it looks like this, and some of the stuff I haven't even heard of before. And then, some people are like, oh, he looks like a demon. Some people are like, he looks like a minotaur. And that's a really cool thing because the idea behind Amarok is that he's sort of this myth. He's this legend within the city, and nobody really knows what he looks like. So to have him be interpreted as so many different ways is really exciting, because that really makes me excited for like the character design and where it can go and where other people can take it and stuff like that. So
yeah, it's nice that you've got it open to interpretation in a way like that. When I'm looking here, this is your art, correct?
correct, yes.
So when I'm looking here at your art, here's a nice double page spread there. The first thing that pops into my mind is that you seem to have a lot of fun with the storytelling aspect of it. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. I think comics, if you're not having fun, then you're not drawing comics, really.
Yeah, because there's man, you're wearing your influences on your sleeve, which is great to see because we don't see that a whole hell of a lot nowadays. Are you aware of that in modern comics? Are there any modern comics that you're reading that you like? Any modern artists that you like?
To me, there are a very select handful of modern artists that I am beyond impressed with, that I think continue to move the medium in a new direction and really have impressive art. One of the biggest being Ryan Stegman. He had some phenomenal work on Venom. That's what he's best known for, of course. But sadly, a lot of the mainstream seem to... Marvel definitely does not want another image revolution to happen, so they have not been prioritizing their artists or giving them as much of a pedestal, and so they are hiring artists that can produce quantity over quality most of the time. And so what you see is very basic line work that a lot of the job is actually done by the colorist and different stuff like that. And in my personal preference, stuff like that doesn't particularly appeal to me. Another example of a really good artist that I'm into would be Jorge Jimenez. He has this really visceral, dynamic style as well. And so there are some very many amazing modern artists, but there are a lot that I think are a little boring and kind of are not utilizing the full capacities of what make comic books such an amazing medium.
Yeah, they don't seem to be pushing it as much as they really could with the visual storytelling. Yeah, that's true. So I'm gonna be asking you a little bit of a possibly difficult to answer question right now. Is that okay with you?
It's totally okay. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And feel free to go, I don't know, Pete, why you gotta be such a jerk. Now, what I'm going to ask you is this, because this is what's going to be on the mind of every single person. This question right here, it's a crowdfunder. Have you done any crowdfunders before? And if you haven't, and this is your first one, are you prepared to fulfill this campaign?
I have not done any crowdfunders before, but I'm going to do my absolute best to do everything I can to fulfill it in the best way possible and ensure that I deliver the best product that I can. I've already looked at, different printing sites and got estimates and, Gemini mailers and all of that kind of stuff. So,
is anyone helping you with fulfillment, or are you going to be fulfilling it yourself?
I think for my first campaign, I'm just going to be fulfilling it myself. So.
All right. Now, if anyone's wondering, Pete, why did you ask that of him, but you don't ask that of many other people? Well, most of the people that come on Comic Book Radio have fulfilled a campaign. Mm-hmm. But also, given the fact that you're tackling such an endeavor at such a young age for the first time, too, And I don't want to necessarily say, oh, you can't do it. You absolutely can do it. And I believe you will do it. But there's a lot of people out there, because I believe this project is worth backing. It looks great. I think it's got the potential to be fantastic, and people could really enjoy it. I want to make sure that you're aware of, this being your first time, that you're establishing trust with your backer, and that even though you've got a fantastic looking project here, at the end of the day, it means nothing if you can't get it to them, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah. But that's great to hear that you've already done your due diligence. It sounds like you've already looked into a lot of different things with logistics and the packing. And, I mean, hearing you even say the words Gemini mailer and all that other, you've done your research. So that's great to hear.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are you going print on demand with this, or are you pursuing offset printing?
I was going to do Indiegogo in demand through this.
Oh, I mean, the print on demand process is digital printing, and then there's a slight difference in terms of how.
I think I'm doing digital printing. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this right now. If you get, and this advice goes for everybody else out there too, if you get between 300 to 500 orders on your printing, you might want to look at offset printing and get 1,000.
Gotcha.
Because your price point might end up being the same, and you get all those extra copies. So let's say you're going to pay $2,000 to $3,000 for shipping. I mean, for printing on that run. If you go print on demand, you're going to pay that for maybe 300 to 500, or if you go offset, you'll pay that for like 1,000, and you'll get a higher quality book, and you'll get way more copies. So you can have those, especially for a campaign like yours, where you want to do more stories with this character. You're going to want those issues, and you're going to want that backlog so you can sell those issues to the new audience coming around. So on your next campaign, they can get the previous. So that's something you want to keep in mind. I don't want to see you have any pitfalls. And the same thing goes for everybody else out there too, when you're doing your campaigns and you've got a series, whether it's mini, ongoing, whatever. You want to make sure that you've got enough that could last you for a few years at least worth of campaigns. So don't forget to look into that. It's offset printing.
Gotcha.
So that's what you want to make sure you look into that. But other than that, I mean, it's great to see that you're taking this endeavor upon yourself, and you're going for it, and you're just getting out there, man. It makes my heart feel warm.
That's good.
Because you're part of a next generation of creative people out there that are up and comers, and for you to kind of be carrying the torch of visual storytelling within comics is great to see. So we're going to take a quick little break here. Then we're going to get back to a few things. I got a couple other questions for you as well. We'll put the link into the chat so they can actually join and ask you a question too, if they'd like. But we'll be back in just a minute or two. You're watching Comic Book Radio. I'm your host, Peter Cimetti. My guest tonight is Joshua DERSTINE, and we're going to be right back in just a minute or two. Don't go anywhere.
Hello everybody, this is Logan Effling, the creator of the comic book Firewatch. It's an action-adventure in a supernatural setting inspired by the great Gold Key era of non-superhero comics, such as Turok, Tarzan, and the Mighty Samson. If you yourself are into non-superhero comics, I think it's worth checking out.
All right, welcome back to Comic Book Radio. I'm here with Joshua DERSTINE talking about Amarok, which is his book. Right now it's on Indiegogo. And at the end of the night, we're going to give that a quick refresh, see if you got any backers, which would be great to see. If you want to go check out this project right now, the link is in the description of the show. All right, so I'm going to put the link for the invite for those that want to join, if you want to drop on in. Here is the link in the chat. Feel free to join the show with your question or comment for Josh. There it is. All right. So, Josh, when you're putting this kind of thing together with this comic, and you've got this crowdfunder, right? Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, you have the comic.
Yeah.
Do you have merchandise in addition to it as perks that people could get?
Not at the moment. I didn't want to stretch myself too thin because obviously this is my first time doing it, so I wanted to keep it a little bit smaller scale just in case, run into any production errors to make sure that I can just deliver the product on time. Now, obviously I would love to branch out and do merchandising later, but that's not the focus of the first campaign. We're just trying to deliver a high quality comic.
That's the correct answer. Now, it would have been okay if you do have merchandise. But that is the correct answer. Mm-hmm. I hope everyone at home that is thinking of doing their very first campaign ever for the very first time on anything ever is listening to that. Right? Because it's so important. It's exactly what you just said. So, and you better fulfill this, young man. Because otherwise we're going to go back. It's on tape. Or at least digitally. Because it's so important that you do exactly what you just said that you do. If you get bogged down with too much of it and you're not able to handle that logistically yet, and you've got all the other things to do, and you're worried more about the bells and whistles, and you don't know how to juggle that yet,
correct.
It's going to impact the comic, it's going to impact the production of that, it's going to impact the fulfillment of that. So instead it allows you to focus on what you got to do, which is great. That's a good answer, man. I'm glad to hear that. So many times people go in there and they're like, I'll do this and that and everything else, and it's their first one, and then they get overwhelmed. So it's great to hear that your focus is on the comic, and that's where it should be, especially for right now. And as you're establishing this character too, and you probably feel the same way about this. It's a new character, so only so many people would kind of buy the merch anyway. Exactly. They're not familiar with the character, Right. So it's great that you're doing it that way. And then on the second campaign, maybe you put some other stuff in there, and the third and the fourth and whatever you've got. But it's great that you're doing it like that. What kinds of we talked about the writers and the artists, but in terms of storytelling, in terms of the characters involved with this story. What kind of influences and inspirations gave birth to these characters and these stories?
So obviously there's a lot of different stuff. My main influence from the beginning of my life was obviously Star Wars. I really love how George does a lot of his world building, and he sort of has that poetic opera feel to it. So for Amarok in particular, it's a very character-based story. It's a very character-centric story. Focusing mainly on him. It's very akin to something like Blade Runner, where you're following Deckard or Agent K throughout the movie, and you're just observing the events that they do. It's not a team book. It's not exactly branching out to a bunch of different characters and trying to juggle everything at once. It's very much focused on him and his interest as a character and what he's going through and what he's been through and what he's currently doing, and the consequences of his actions, whether they be in the past or the present, and his sort of internal struggles, that sort of thing. is something that really appeals to me. So, a very protagonist heavy story.
Now, every hero needs a couple good villains.
For sure.
What are the villains in Amarok?
So the villains in issue 1, he's really dealing a lot with the law enforcement of this world. And could I get more in depth about like the world and everything?
You can go as in depth as you'd like.
All right, that's wonderful. So Amarok is a fantasy that takes place thousands of years into the future. So if you think of it as a Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones style world, I wanted to see how that would evolve into a Blade Runner setting. So how would a fantasy evolve towards the future? And so the idea with that is that humans are constantly industrializing, we're constantly progressing forward, but we're also taking advantage of all of our resources and abusing them and not really thinking of the moral repercussions of what that could cause later on. And so the main idea is that if you try to take something as sacred and as powerful as magic and industrialize it, what is going to happen to the people? Is magic going to allow them to just come in and take it for themselves, or is it going to have a bit of a rebuttal? Is it going to fight back? It's very similar to something like Princess Mononoke, where the nature itself realizes that it's being taken advantage of, the magic realizes that it's being taken advantage of, and so it fights back. Everything starts mutating, the trees start growing humongous, the animals start mutating.
Magic always comes at a cost too, right?
Exactly. And so what happens is that the lands that were once able to live peacefully together with humans have now become uninhabitable. So humans have had to branch off into different sections and build up these huge fortresses to protect themselves from the outside world. And they have taken magic and they have turned it into a synthetic drug that, once injected, affects each user differently depending on their blood type and DNA makeup, resulting in an unholy union of science and magic. So it is a black market, most valuable, product in the city, and it's essentially what allows people to have these different magical powers rather than harnessing it in a way that respects the magic. So obviously when you open up, you're aware that Amarok is in possession of these drugs and he has these powers, and you're not exactly sure how or why he got them, but as the story goes on, you'll learn more and more. So our story opens up with, for the city, for example, I wanted to take something that was very cyberpunk-esque and very dystopian and literally flip it on its head. So I'm sure everybody's well aware of the trope of the poor living down in the poor part of the city and the rich people living up in the clouds. Yeah. So for my idea, I actually flipped that on its head, where it's like, okay, what if the higher you go up, the harder it becomes to inhabit, and the atmosphere starts getting poisonous, and the buildings become less unstable because they didn't give as much attention to them as they went up. And so down lower, it's a lot safer, it's cleaner, it's they keep it up to date, it's a very strong base, but the higher levels of the city are simply a lot more difficult to live in. And so the idea is that the government sort of runs a very communist centered down in the bottom of the city, where, for example, you can live there and you don't really have to worry about the economical aspects of it, but you do have to submit to every order of the government. You have to work every job that they give you. You have to do whatever they tell you. You have to curfew.
You can't speak out. You got to vote the way. Yeah. Otherwise, they take away your income.
Yeah, it's all government centric. However, if you don't
There's some parts of the world that are like that.
Yeah, for sure. If you don't want that, if you don't like that, you can move up to the higher levels of the city, the unsafe levels of the city, and you can have your freedom and you can do what you want. And so what you find is that there was a lot of tribes and clans that existed in the world. And as it's progressed, you either have to choose, are you going to stick to the traditional aspects of the tribe, or are you going to go the safer route and take it easy down and the lower parts of the city. So the upper city is pretty much overrun by these ancient tribes that have progressed into gangs, and so they sort of control that aspect up there, whereas the lower is much more focused on the government actually protecting it and keeping it safe, and etc. So it's basically the decision of, do you want to be safe or do you want your freedom? And so you really can't blame either side on which decision they take, because obviously some people want to keep their family safe and they don't want to risk it, and they don't want to risk anything bad happening. So it's a much safer option to choose to live on the lower edges of the city. Now, when we open up, Amrock is this very angry man. He has a very troubled past. Something that happened in his past has caused him to sort of start taking down these different government operatives and different patrols. And when we open up, we're not exactly sure why. We just know that he's sort of having this Batman moment where he's jumping down on some unsuspecting prey and just going to town. So that's really where the story sort of opens up. And as we progress, you see very easily that he is essentially the city's boogeyman. He has been a legend in the city for the past 5 years. So actually, Amarok is an Inuit Native American word, which is basically like it's a very mythical creature that's like a giant lone wolf that hunts unsuspecting prey at night. So it's a good allegory for what Amarok does.
I was wondering if you knew about that. Yeah, I figured you must have.
Yeah, it's definitely a big centric part of the story. And so as we open up, he's sort of dealing with these low-level, patrol that the government has sent out. And so there's the first arc of the story is essentially him taking them down. And at the beginning, you think he's one kind of character, and then you very quickly, like, he kind of falls into that Batman Punisher vibe. And then you very quickly realize at a very specific scene that is not what he is at all. And my tagline is a vigilante without a purpose. And you see very quickly what that sort of comes to mean. He's actually doing this out of a selfish desire to right a wrong that was placed upon him at a young age, and trying to exact a vengeance.
So there's a revenge motive, not a justice motive?
Exactly. But the other issue with that is that it's not revenge against any one particular person. It's just revenge against everybody. So he kind of like hates the world at this point.
So right now he's raging against the machine, essentially?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's sort of his purpose, which really is not a purpose. And so as far as he's been doing this, he's been the top of the food chain. He's been able to take these guys down with easy. This is sort of how he gets his anger out. I mean, if you're familiar with Daredevil, it's a very similar thing where he sort of enjoys being violent and being the harbinger of justice on these criminals, but it is a selfish motive rather than a selfless motive, which obviously I like my characters to experience consequences, and very dire consequences for a very selfish action. So very quickly, it transitions into him facing a foe that is way more powerful than he is, and having to figure out how he's going to deal with that. Because up until this point, he's been the top of the food chain. He's been the apex predator, but he realizes very quickly that, he's not as powerful as he thought he was.
Interesting. So is he at odds? I'm guessing this puts him at odds with the government.
Oh yeah, for sure. So the main thing is that nobody has really lived to see what or who he is. So there's been rumors spread all over. It's causing issues in the political agendas of the government and all of that. So what the government has actually started doing is that they have imbued one member of each patrol with the magic drug as sort of a last resort in case they do get attacked. So this actually happens to be the first instance where they started enrolling that. So you see very quickly that this drug-enhanced member quickly is more than a match for Amarok.
I wonder how you're gonna have the story unfold with that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Let's see. So without spoiling anything, I don't want you to spoil anything at all, of course. I'm going to put the link one more time in here. If you guys want to join, feel free. If you've got a question or comment for Josh, feel free to join.
The trailer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we'll get to that, and then I got a couple other questions from you for you, and then we'll wrap up. So here we go. Here's the trailer. Let me make sure that this plays correctly here. Let's get the overlay out, and there we go. All right, here we are. Very nice, man.
Thank you.
Very, very nice. Who made the trailer for you? Did you put that together?
So I actually hired a composer to do, because I had a very specific theme that I had in mind. So I hired a composer to do a theme. Then I hired somebody to do the electric guitar at the end, and then I actually had a buddy who did the sort of the vocals at the beginning, that very sort of the deep vocals at the beginning, and then I edited it together. That's a hard word to say. I put it together myself after that, and just played around with it until I got something that felt sort of how I wanted it to.
That's great. Good job.
Thank you.
Very nice, man. So Amarok is a futuristic dark fantasy about magic, drugs, over-the-top action, and a vigilante without a purpose. If you guys have not checked it out yet, please feel free to do so. Here is the link right there in the chat. It's also in the description of the show. Gerald Lang is asking, looks great. You have my buddy David Finch doing a cover?
Yeah, David Finch. So if you scroll down a little bit, we can see the Finch cover here. There it is in all of its glory. He did an absolutely phenomenal job, captured the amazing gothic grandeur of all that Amarok is. So I couldn't be more gracious and thankful for his support in the project.
Very nice. Finch is a terrific artist.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's not really a proper word, but terrific will have to do for now.
Yeah.
But so you've got a bunch of people on the creative team here. You got John Livesey, you got Andrew Dahlhaus, Eric Weathers, Rob Willis doing a cover, Kanan White doing a cover. When it comes to the art here, you've got the duties here of the writing and the art. Are you doing all traditional and then scanning it in, or are you doing any sort of traditional digital with what you're doing?
Yeah, I sort of like the idea of combining both mediums together to utilize the best way that you can do it. So pushing forward into the new digital age, but still completely respecting the traditional. So if you've heard of Dan Fraga, he's been a great mentor to me.
I've heard of Dan Fraga.
Yeah. And he has introduced, well, not introduced, I mean, Ryan Stegman does it as well. Those are the two guys in my circle that I kind of talk to a lot. This idea of tradigital, so doing traditional.
Did Dan tell you that word?
Yeah,
That sounds like a Dan Fraga
that
thing.
is a Dan Fraga word. So what I'll do is I'll usually do my thumbnail or my layout on just a printer piece of paper. I'll import that to Procreate, and I'll do the finished layout on there because you can move it around, you can resize things. It's just a lot more efficient to developing the best page that you can. And then once I have the fundamentals laid out, I'll actually print that out on blue line, like an inker would. I'll print it out on blue line, and then I'll traditionally pencil on top of that to get the finished pencils of the page. And then,
Very
of course,
nice.
John Livesey is inking everything traditionally. He's been a 30-year inking veteran, working for Image, Marvel, DC, all the companies you could think of. You know, he's inked over Mark Silvestri, Michael Turner, all those guys. So he's absolutely perfect for Amarok.
Absolutely. And NXerd, I was going to ask this, but this is great coming from NXerd. This is going to be my next question, ironically. Must be reading my mind, man. It says, how did you manage to attract these people to the project as a first-timer?
So I've sort of been building up my social media contacts, social networking, since I was like 14, 15, you know, being on, you know, kind of started out on Reddit, kind of moved away from Reddit. They can be a little...
Reddit is,
yeah,
I still can't figure Reddit out.
Yeah.
It feels like
they're really nice and sometimes they're really mean. So
Reddit feels like a place you're not supposed to be.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe it. Like I was like 15 putting my art up and there were people be writing essays, completely just tearing me down. And you're like some like 42-year-old guy in your mom's basement tearing down this 15-year-old kid with a dream. So, you know, that wasn't like my favorite experience. So then I kind of moved over to Twitter and Instagram. And thankfully, I've had a much better experience with much nicer
They
people.
were just helping you to build character.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
If you could survive Reddit,
sure.
You could survive anything on the internet.
Exactly. They were giving me that motivation to prove them wrong. And prove them wrong I did. And so on Twitter, the cool thing is that you can actually reach out to a bunch of different people and you can tag them and they'll see it. And so I actually seem to gain a very big traction when I started posting my art. And, you know, obviously it's, for a lot of people, it's very cool to see such a young person pursuing something at such an intense level. It's almost like unbelievable. Like you said at first, you thought I was an adult masquerading as a kid or stealing the work.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not sharing that. That's someone faking it.
Exactly. But yeah,
that's a bot account.
That's kind of the cost of being I guess having really, really detailed art. It's hard for people to comprehend that.
Yeah, and speaking of which, too, to get into that for just a second, we got a couple more minutes left, but you've been developing your artwork for a while, for years. How many hours a day do you put into drawing?
Well, it was really great because I didn't have any friends in high school, so I just went home. And
it's okay. Most people, you know, after high school, you're not really friends with them anyway.
Yeah, I just come home, draw, and go to bed and wake up, draw during school. I actually had a really great experience. It was a smaller school. It was more of a chill school. And all the teachers really liked me because I was quiet, I kept my head down, and I didn't cause any sort of scene or anything. So they sort of just let me draw during the entire class, and nobody had a problem with it. So I would draw during class, and I would draw when I came home, and that is just what I devoted all my time to. And now I graduated last month, and I'm just drawing every day, and you know, obviously still studying, still practicing, still going back to the fundamentals. You know, I like to pick out one of my books every now and then and just really do a in-depth study of it again. So I'm looking at, you know, how to draw comics the Marvel way, really getting into John Buscema, John Byrne. I really like those guys quite a bit. They have really great fundamentals. My favorite aspect of comic art is when it has cartoonish proportions with realistic rendering. I think that's, to me, what appeals to me most about comics is this sort of marriage of cartoony illustration as well as realistic detail, and trying to find a balance between that really works. And one of the things that's always frustrated me is that people are so hard on the 90s artists for having incorrect anatomy. but nobody cares about Charlie Brown's incorrect anatomy, because it's the same thing. They're both forms of cartooning. Obviously, Charlie Brown cannot fit all the organs into his stomach because he's a cartoon.
Got a big head.
So, a big head, right. So if you're
Poor little bald
complaining
kid.
that same critique towards other forms of cartooning, it just kind of falls apart because it's all fake. It's not real. But
I mean, there's definitely some moments. It's not consistent, but there's some moments from sometimes in a panel or a page or whatever where you're like, I don't know what's happening there.
Yeah.
But like you said, most of it's because of the fact that you're keeping that energy, or at least trying to keep that energy as much as you can. And to do that, you can't torture the page. You can't spend so much time on it that you stiffen the artwork and lose the energy and the vibe of it. So sometimes in trying to preserve the energy, you lose a little bit of the form. But then, if you were to ask the extreme opposite and say, okay, lose all the energy, preserve the form, I think most people would go, I don't really want to see that.
Right.
You'd rather pick the art that preserves the
that's
energy.
one of the big things with guys like Joe Madureira, is that he's a very shape-centered artist. He's not an anatomical-centered artist. He's focused on the shapes and what will move the reader through the page that way, rather than having perfect anatomy that follows, anatomically correct form and all of that. And you look at that with any artist, even David Finch, it's all about defining your shape language and what you want to commit to your style. Now, obviously, a lot of that is going to be based upon your mistakes, but you can also choose what sort of shape language is more attuned to your preferences.
Well, and as you're pushing the dynamics of your art, you're going to have things that look like they can't possibly exist.
Exactly.
But that's the whole point. See, Shadowhawk says, Hail Pizza and Joshua, backed on launch, looking forward to this. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Shadowhawk.
All right. Andrew says, great art. I wish I could draw, but found writing to be my creative outlet. Well, there you go, Andrew. That's always great, too. So as you're pushing, we got about 1 or 2 more minutes. I want to get just a little more out of you here. So as you're pushing the boundaries of your art, you're making it as dynamic as you possibly can. What's some of the thoughts that go through your mind when you first are sketching out? Do you start with a gestural drawing? Do you start with encompassing the entire composition? How do you start, and where do you decide this needs to get pushed?
So the idea is drawing with force, drawing with intensity. I sort of want, as you're reading the page, I want it to feel very similar as going down a winding road where your car is going back and forth and you can feel that momentum. So I really want that to have a similar effect on the page, where I'm carrying the reader through it with the momentum of my figures and my compositions and my layouts. And if you look at the first 2 pages, they're very focused around classic storytelling, around very safe storytelling. And as we continue to branch out, you noted that, I really start to have fun with it and experiment with different stuff that you can really only do in comic books, having more pages that have crazy border outlines or are focused on the collage effect or stuff like that. So really developing a overall composition that not only can lead the eye, but is also exciting for the reader and makes it interesting, and you never know what you're going to get with a page, is what excites me most for people to see.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Brian says, we touched upon this a little bit, but I'm going to ask you to try to remember when you made, we'll go to the splash page. When you made this splash page, it's page 3. About how much time did you spend on the pencils?
Well, that one was definitely going a lot back and forth. So like I said before, I'm very focused on making sure it looks how it looks in my head. So the very, if you're not an artist, you're probably not going to pick up on it right away. But he sort of has this pose where his torso is pushed back and his pelvis is pushed forward, which creates this sort of S pose throughout the S curve throughout the pose. that sort of instills the intensity and the power that I wanted behind it. So a lot of the process was figuring that out. And what I'll usually do is I'll jot something down and I'll take a step back, have it fresh in my brain, and then come back again and see, okay, what can I tweak? What can I change? And then redo that. So, you know, I'm somebody that's always a big advocate for drawing through. So, you know, even though you're not going to see the thighs or the musculature of the thighs, I would draw those in just to make sure that it follows the correct proportions that I wanted for the figure. And then, so that took a few hours, you know, just figuring all that out. And then obviously the city is a very, very insanely detailed city. So that took a few hours as well. And then actually, surprisingly, the most trouble that I had on this page was figuring out the correct arm and the metal arm, and how I could have those shapes interact with one another, because it is a bit of a complicated task to sort of embark on, in making sure that it has semblances of anatomy while it still sort of has its own design and doesn't look too discombobulated, but also has energy flowing through it. So that's something that I did take a little bit of time on. And then obviously all of the insane 90s style scissor cross hatching that I went through on it. And so yeah, it took, you know, probably 15-20 hours, somewhere in there. I don't even know. But
wow. Yep.
Some people move really, really fast. Now, another thing that you'll notice is that I am a tight penciler. I do have a difficult time loosening up. So being that tight also takes quite a bit of time as well. So I have been trying to loosen up for John, because I know, you know, he can basically take a layout and then do finishes on it. So, but yeah, so if you look at my art, you'll notice it's very crosshatch intense. It's very crosshatch centric, and I really like trying to try new crosshatching methods and new shapes and stuff like that. For this book, I'm sort of doing more less defined crosshatching to allow John to experiment with what he wants and what he can do. So I'm not building up the shapes as much on those. But yeah, it's all in an attempt to speed up my process, and that is definitely the most difficult thing for me as a comic artist, is that I don't have the experience of the graybeards, like that comment said. So it is me sort of trying to build my visual library and build my my speed, so that I can pick it up and produce content faster. And then obviously the other thing is that I'm still learning, so there's stuff that I don't know how to do, so maybe I'll do something wrong and I have to go back and fix it 5 different times until I get it to look just right. So it's definitely a back and forth process. It's not linear. I find that when learning art, a lot of people want it to be very linear and straightforward. You do this and this happens. You do this and this happens.
That's never going to happen.
What I found over the years is that it's very, very organic. You're all over the place. You're constantly learning from different sources. You will suddenly realize things that just click, and then it will make sense all of a sudden. But the main thing is just putting in those hours to build speed and experience as you go on, and always being open to everything and really taking it step by step, because it is quite overwhelming. Because in my opinion, comics are the most overwhelming aspect of art, because you have to know how to draw every single thing there ever is, and then you have to direct that, you have to light that, you have to make the actors act, you have to decide compositional elements, and you have to figure out how to tell the story simply through a sequential process of pictures.
Yep.
And so that is all very overwhelming and definitely takes a while to figure out and learn, but it is also the most rewarding part of it. So yeah, it takes a while to figure everything out. This is not a quick and easy thing. This is not a Garfield comic, you know. It's a very, and obviously I love Garfield, I love those guys, but it's a completely different skill set. I mean, there's obviously very similarities, and obviously Will Eisner has a lot of amazing advice and points like that, but when you're doing a full-scale 22-page comic that's not a newspaper strip, there is so much that goes into it that the viewer will not even see. So
yeah, well, especially you're not doing decompressed storytelling, so you're not doing things where you just have panels that are just kind of there, not
Yeah.
really progressing the story at all. You know, you're cramming as much into every page and every panel
Oh, yeah.
as it looks like as you possibly can. And some of these
It
shots, I
is.
look at it and I go, I don't know how you're going to maintain consistency within the city. You know,
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
highly detailed. You know, keeping perspective on certain buildings of where they would lay out within the city, so that it
For
flows
sure.
and reads. You know,
Yeah.
you don't have Manhattan or even a fictional city like Gotham where you can reference a couple
Yeah.
other things. You know, you're
Yeah.
coming up with this
The
stuff.
biggest inspiration for this city is actually Sid Mead with a lot of his work.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And even if you look at the first panel in page 1, and then the first panel, well, not the first panel, the second panel technically, but it's the big panel. The first panel on page 1, and then actually you go
Yeah,
down
not
to
the
the third.
inset here. This one.
Yeah, you go down to the third panel, and the same building that's behind the guards is still the same building that's behind them in the next panel.
Yeah, look at that. I could see
Yeah.
that right there.
Throughout the book. So, yeah, there is a lot of designing that goes into it as well, which I don't think is praised enough for comic artists, how much you have to design on the spot and to
Yeah.
keep it consistent.
I mean, a comic artist has to be not just great with the figure, obviously, but they got to be a great animal artist. They got to be an architect. They
Yep.
got to be a fashion designer. You know, you gotta do everything.
Every single
So, yeah,
Yeah.
man, oh man, very nice. Well, thank you so much, Joshua, for joining me tonight. Spending some time going over Amarok here, your book.
Thank you for having me on.
No problem at all. Let's give a quick refresh. Hopefully you got a backer during the course of it. If not, no big deal. You'll do well. You'll do good. Okay, 15,095. No backers during the show, but we'll probably get some backers later. Especially there's always people that watch the show on replay. 256 backers on board. You got 7 days left. Are you going in demand?
So what we actually will be doing is we'll be doing a reset and add another 30 days just to sort of, sort of encourage people to back it, and then we will actually be going to in demand and, fulfilling it that way.
Very nice.
So.
Anything new on the next 30 days?
Yeah, so I'll actually be adding a Ryan Stegman cover to the covers. So
wow,
if you
okay, very
are
nice.
A fan of his art, he'll be cooking up something pretty epic. So definitely excited to see that.
One last question from the chat. Brian asks, I was wondering, is this a 22-page contained story, or is this going to be a cliffhanger?
So this is actually going to be a 32-page story. And then it will, in fact, it's going to complete the first arc of, it's a very self-contained story. It's not setting up like an Avengers level thing. It's a self-contained story, but when this issue one ends, you will want to pick up issue 2. It does end where it sort of finishes out the story, but it does leave you on a bit of that cliffhanger of what's going to happen next. But I'm hoping to walk the best of both worlds in the fact that it can provide a satisfactory ending, but also make you excited for the next issue, because I think that's really where comics excel.
Very nice, very nice. All right, thank you so much, Josh, and everybody for watching tonight. This has been a fun episode. A lot of different art going on and talking about the dynamics of it and writing and all that good stuff. Very nice. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, Josh. Everybody in the chat, thank you guys as well for watching. Everybody that watches later, thank you guys for watching as well. And go check out Amarok. It's on Indiegogo. Got 7 days left, and then another 30 days on top of that and all that good stuff. Watch out for that Ryan Stegman cover. Also, thank you guys so much for backing King Cryptid. Really appreciate that. We got about 19 or so days left before we go in demand on that. A lot of different things on that campaign. Go check it out. We're almost at 350 backers. We need about 10 or 9 or so more, and then we hit 350. So thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Everyone have a wonderful night. I'm going to be on the Red Valkyrie channel tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Eastern, and then I'll be back here at 9 o'clock on Friday Eastern Time to talk to Literature Devil about character development and writing. Joshua, thank you once again, man. Where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at the Art Jedi. And yeah.
All right, very nice. Everyone, thank you once again and have a wonderful evening. We'll see you again soon. Take it easy.
Thank you so much.